Hi everybody, welcome to the latest edition of Cycle News Live. This is the third time we've done a Cycle News Live. It seems to be a fairly cool thing. You guys have been really responsive, and we've been loving the comments and all the feedback from all you guys. It's been a lot of fun doing these things. So we're going to step it up a notch for today. Today I have an incredibly special guest. Now this guy is, probably my all-time hero, I was going to say. In terms of motorcycle racing, and a huge legend in the sport. Now, the man is, of course, Mr. Wayne Rainey. Now, Rainey is a three-time MotoGP world champion from 1990, 91, and 92, and then obviously had his terrible life-changing accident in 1993, where he lost the use of his legs. Now, that sort of coincided with the reinvention of the man, which shows the kind of character that he is. So. Obviously he's now running Moto America. So here's the man himself, Mr. Wayne Rainey. Thank you very much for joining us on Cycle News Live.
Thanks, buddy. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, it's an honor. Thank you. And you've been a busy man. You just moved house.
Sure have. Bought a house, closed it right before the pandemic hit. So it was a bit of a challenge putting on a new roof, painting the inside, all the bits and bobs that my wife wanted, but Shay's walking around happy, so I'm good with that.
Happy wife, happy life, as they say. So it's been a very, I suppose, trying time for you guys with the pandemic. I mean, you guys are on the front line, I guess, for motorcycle racing in the US. So talk us through the plans for Moto America, and I mean, it almost seems like it changes by the day almost. So it must be tough for you guys.
Yeah, it sure has. We had our first test back there at Barber, I think back in March. It's the first time the guys got together and rode. And then the pandemic hit, and everybody knows what happened then. It's just been a disaster all over the world. Everything shut down. We had everybody sheltering in place. Us being motorcycle racing series, we have to have spectators, so that's been a challenge. But we've been working with the Safe to Race Task Force. All of our races, when we do start to go back racing, they're going to be in compliance with the National Health Guides. And I think, Rainey, tomorrow or the next day, we're going to have a big announcement about Moto America, and it will be about motorcycle racing. So looking forward to that.
Oh, that's good news. That's good news. I wanted to talk to you about the Laguna Seca event, because that's going to be a standalone event this year where we don't have World Superbike this year, so this is going to be a pretty big deal for Moto America to have its own standalone Laguna Seca, and of course your home track. You were known as Mr. Laguna Seca back then, so tell us a bit about what we can expect.
Yeah, you're right. So no World Superbike, so it's going to be a standalone Moto America race. We were very, very excited about it. The pre-ticket sales, hospitality sales was up like 75% from where it was last year. We're gonna have a hill climb race in the dirt, a hill climb race, but a hill climb. But we're actually gonna have a hill climb where guys on bikes, street bikes, are going to be riding up the hill. That's never happened before at the track. There's going to be a baggers race. That's Harley and Indians are going to be there riding. It's going to be a motorcycle show, a heritage cup. A carnival for kids, learn to ride program. We were very excited about it. So we don't have that date announced yet, but we should have something about that here in about a week or two.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you're now, like, what is it, 6 years in with Moto America, at the helm of Moto America. How have you seen the sport grow in the time that you took it on? Because when you guys formed Moto America, sport was in a fairly damaged state, so shall we say. I mean, it had gone from being, especially from my point of view, being an outsider, seeing, I always looked at the American Superbike Championship as the premier national Superbike Championship in the world, and it really lost its luster in the early 2010s, and then you guys kind of got it in as an emergency state, I guess you could call it, and then you've been rebuilding it since then. So how's it been going for you guys?
Well, Rainey, it's a good way to put it, but it's about 8 or 9 years ago, Dorna came to me, and they were concerned about new American riders developing to get into the World Championship. They asked if I had any ideas, and I said I'd think about it. I thought about it for a year. Didn't really pay much attention to the AMA Superbike Series. I did know that at that point around 08 or 09, the manufacturers were pulling out because they changed the rules. So when I got more involved, I had met Richard Varner and Terry Cargis. They're my partners now, and they'd asked me to help them with a motorcycle program to build a retro style superbike, street bike. But that got me thinking about the question that Dorna had asked me. So the more I got to learn to know my new partners, I said, hey, what do you guys think about trying to do something with, let's build a class for young kids, and let's see if we can, build a reality show around it. And they all agreed to do that. So I needed some help with that. So I called Chuck Axlin, got him involved. He was working at Coda at the time. So we got pretty far down the road with that program. It was going to be like a Moto 2, Moto 3 style bikes. We looked buying chassis and trying to get that whole thing going. And then Joe Campbell there I think it was the last MotoGP race at Laguna Seca. She said, she goes, Wayne, we're really concerned about the AMA Superbike Series. We don't even know if they're going to be racing again the following year. So I didn't even really realize that. So we took a look at that, and we could see that they were in trouble. They were down to like 50 or 60 riders. They was just having a couple races on the schedule. They had lost some, their TV network contract. So we decided we thought that it was probably important to keep the national championship going. So we took it on as like a startup. It's been 6 years now. When we started, there was, I think, there was about 70 riders when we started. Here it is going on year 6. We've got the last race last year, we had over 140 riders. We had 5 classes. We have our own TV production now ourselves. We're on Fox TV, NBC Sports. We're on MAV TV this year. We have Live Plus as our for our live TV, and let's see what else we got. I think we got our YouTube program. So it has come a long way in just that in that 6 years. So there's been a lot of work, but we're really excited about what's going on in the future. Now, obviously, we got to get through this pandemic. We're going to do the right thing, and we're going to come back racing when it's the right time. But everybody on my crew is very excited. The sponsorship's up. We've hired new marketing guys, new sponsorship guys. So we're investing. We're going for it.
Yeah. It's interesting because the series in the last couple of years, has garnered a lot of publicity with the removal or the withdrawal, I guess, of the distributor or the factory-based distributor teams with Yamaha and Suzuki. But it seems to be now more in line with what is in the British Championship. Most of the teams in the BSB are not run by Yamaha England and Suzuki England and things like that. Like the British Ducati team is run by Paul Bird and things like that. So is that a bit of an alignment, I guess, in the way the series is run? Because you also have Stuart Higgs as well, who he's the man in charge of the British Championship. He helps run with you guys. So has that been just a happy coincidence, or like what's your view on that kind of stuff?
Well, actually, Rainey, Suzuki hasn't really changed anything except their program was always run with a satellite team, that being Yoshimura Suzuki. So this year they went from Yosh team to the M4 Suzuki team. So they just changed teams. Yamaha team, that was run in-house, but this year they're going with the Stamboli Monster Yamaha team. So that's more like what they do in World Superbike, with the way that they run their satellite World Superbike teams. So that's what they're also doing here. So that's been really the biggest change. Yeah.
So you touched on World Superbike as well. Now this year is, I suppose, the second year that you've had an American go from your championship to the World Championship. First being Jake Gagne with the 10K Honda team, and now with Garrett Gerloff. And Gerloff seemed to, I suppose he acquitted himself pretty well. The level is extremely high in World Superbike now. So you think this vision of trying to get the US guys back to the front in World Championships is starting to bear fruit?
Yeah, and it probably could have happened a couple years early, Rennie. I know JD Beach had a shot to go over there, and Cameron Bobier. But I think, the American scene was, they were making a lot of money here. So they decided to stay. I think with Garrett Gerloff, he went over there and for the last couple of years went into the paddocks in both World Superbike and MotoGP, showed his face. I said that's the best thing that you have to do. You have to get over there because they don't know what you look like. They don't get to see you race, and so you have to go over there and tell them who you are. Go introduce yourself, and he did. And then so he made the jump. I'm sure he took a big pay cut from what he was making here to go over there and race in World Superbike. But it looks like he wants to try to be world champion. Watching him at that first Superbike race, I was pretty pumped for him. I think his qualifying was maybe a bit of nerves, but I think he went through about 10 or 12 guys in the first couple corners in that first race. So I was proud of his result of what he did. And then he got taken out the next day in practice, and I think he had a concussion or something. But I think he's out of all the guys that came from Moto America, I think he's got the most natural speed.
Yeah, he's. I've been a big fan of Gerloff. Like, I've got to know him briefly through the paddock, and he's one of those guys that just chips away at things. Like he doesn't go in and set the world on fire, but you can tell that the speed's there, and he's incredibly determined young kid. I mean, I think you're pretty right in that. Like, he's definitely got the skills. Who else do you think is in your mind? You reckon is going to be able to make the jump or wants to make the jump more likely?
Rocco Landers for sure. He was our Liquid Moly Junior Cup champion last year. The kid's got a lot of charisma. He's been to Europe a couple times. He's already seen what that's about. I think that's what young Americans have to do. I think the opportunity to go to Europe is still as good as it's always been. You just have to have that desire. You're probably going to have to take some money with you, but that's the way it's always been. But it's it's a crazy life over there. It's not America. The culture's a lot different. The racing, I wouldn't say the racing's a lot different, but certainly the day-to-day living in these different countries over there is not America. So you have to be open to how they do it. And that's, there's a couple kids that are going to do it. Sean Dillon Kelly, he rides in our 600 Super Sport class. He rode the Red Bull Rookies Cup for 3 years. And I think he'll probably be back over there pretty quick.
Yeah. How was it for you? I mean, was it different for you? Like, did you always know that you wanted to go to the World Championships? Like, you're a dirt tracker, and then you got into superbikes. Like, was it always a thing that you weren't, okay, I want to be in MotoGP, this is how I'm going to do it? Or did it sort of just happen off its own accord, I guess?
Hey, I was a flat tracker, man. That's all I did. I did that from I was a young kid. I did that. I think I was a rookie expert in 1979, and I didn't even think about road racing. I didn't think about road racing until actually Kawasaki decided they wanted to bring in KX250 short track engines, and they were going to have Eddie Lawson ride the bike, and then Eddie had hurt himself road racing of all things, and so Eddie had turned them on to me to say, give this guy a shot. So I didn't know if the bike would be any good, but what I really dug about is that they gave me a gas cart. So flat trackers know what it's like to live out of your truck. I did that for a long time, but yeah, we went out and won the first race with it, and actually won a couple more races that year. I think that was it was like 1980. And then in 1981, Dennis Mahan and Dave Dewey from Kawasaki Accessories Division asked if I had ever thought about road racing. And I had no clue where a road race track even was. And so, but I went out to, I think it was Riverside. They ended up at the Keith Code Superbike School and worked with Keith there, and was able to make the adjustment from flat track racing to road race. I saw right away that the future for me was in road racing because of the amount of money you could make, the manufacturers that were there. There was just more opportunity, and I think I was right at that stage of my career. It was a good time for me to make the transition.
Right. So you a couple of years in. I mean, you've 1981. So by 3 years of you doing road racing, we show you this shot here. You're in the World Championships, riding for Kenny Roberts. It's a big jump to be going from flat tracking to straight into GPs. It's how did that all come about? Because that's a hugely steep learning curve.
Well, I did the Keith Code School, and then I did about 15 club races and won most of them. And then Kawasaki, the factory, asked if I wanted to ride a 250 at the AMA Superbike race back at Loud, New Hampshire. So they said, if you could be back in New Hampshire by Wednesday, and this was a Monday when they called me, they said, you got a bike there. So I loaded up my neighbor next door. We jumped in my van. The speed limit was 55 back in them days. And we drove all the way to New Hampshire. And I had my Kawasaki flat track leathers on, my Ken Maley boots. And I rode this 250 two-stroke Kawasaki. Had never ridden a two-stroke road race bike and never been to Loudon. The race was in the rain, and I won the race by 20 seconds. And Kawasaki offered me a factory Superbike road racing contract for the next 2 years in 82 and 83. So, so that was a big step, going from, production 550 and 750 street bikes to them 1,000cc flexi 150 horsepower super bikes. So that scared the shit out of me riding that for a while, riding those bikes. But in 1983, the rules changed from 1,000 down to 750, and Kawasaki had an air cooled inline 4, and then that's the year that Honda introduced their new Interceptor. It was a water cooled V4.
Yep.
Honda won the first 6 races, and we won, I think, the last 6 races, and we were able to beat Honda and Mike Baldwin in the championship. So I won my Superbike championship, and Kawasaki decided to pull out of road racing for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And so at that stage, I had met Kenny about a year earlier, Kenny Roberts, and his last year of racing Grand Prix was 83. So I was stuck without a ride, and so he put a 250 team together, and next thing I know, I'm lining up in South Africa.
All right. How was the culture shock there? As you say, it's a big change for American riders to be able to go and do the European thing. I mean, you've gone from being a dirt tracker to AMA Superbike champion to 250 Grand Prix racer in such a short time, and then going and doing the European thing, which is a lot different to the European thing now. I mean, there's no social media, there's no FaceTime, there's no connection. You must have felt completely different.
Well, that was, apartheid was still still going on in South Africa. So that was the whole culture down there in South Africa was like something I had never seen. The racetrack, though, this is my first time at Kyalami. I'll never forget the first time I had Alan Carter as a teammate, and the first practice was in the rain, and we didn't have rain tires mounted up. So Kenny just said, "Hey, it's quit raining, so just go out there on slicks and just kind of ride around, just get to know the track, and then if it rains more, then come back in. We'll get you some rain tires on." So I went out there and I wobbled around for like 5 laps, and then a dry line started forming, and the next thing I know, I'm just coming through the pack. I'm just passing everybody. Just passed the current world champion was Carlos Lovato. And then I'd come up on his teammate, and going down the long downhill straightaway there, I was just gonna go by him, and it just as I tipped it in to pass him, we had a huge downpour, and I ended up falling down, and I took Ivan Palazzesi out, and we both ended up on our heads in the sand trapper, and he got up and come over, and he was not very happy with me. That was my first practice session against the 250 GP guy, so I made a name for myself right away.
Yeah, straight up. Yeah, and that season, I mean, you did get a podium, if I recall correctly. But at the end of that, you I guess you packed up and you came back to the States at that point. And at that point, you get back into superbike racing. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think in that year, '84, we, I was on the front row quite a few times, but they had that frickin' push start. I hated push starts. And by the time I got the bike started, I was normally behind the pace car. So normally the most difficult one for me to pass was that pace car because you didn't behind them. So that was that. For some reason, I just struggled with the push start. I kind of got it sorted out at the end of the year. But after that first year, I did get I ended up getting on a podium there at Misano. But after I saw that and went through that, living in a motorhome and being by myself, I remember when I came home the first time and my mom picked me up at the airport and I had lost like 25 pounds and she didn't know if Kenny was feeding me over there. Living by myself, I was just doing a lot of training. There was not much else to do. But but I knew that I wasn't quite ready to race for the world championship, and I had some opportunities, but I ended up coming back in the States and racing for Bob McLean and Tim O'Sullivan on a private Honda. It was in the 250 and 500 class, and won a couple races. But I got Honda's attention, and Gary Mathers, which was the team manager at Kawasaki when I raced there, when I was back in the States, he had now moved to Honda, and he saw talent in me, so he gave me a shot and signed me up to ride Superbikes alongside Fred Merkel in 1986.
Right. So that then kicks forward your, I guess, your career with Honda, and then moves on to one of the most, I suppose, famous races of the 80s was the transatlantic match races that you and I guess that was the beginning of the rivalry with you and Kevin Schwantz.
I think it started before that, but I think Kevin and Merkel, they were pretty good pals, and I was trying to make a name for myself, and they were pretty close buddies, and I just didn't fit into what they were up to, and so I was all about trying to win the championship because I knew I wanted to try to get back to Europe. So Schwantz, though, he just seemed to get inspired whenever he saw me. If he saw me on the track, whether it was in practice or in the race, I mean, he would be nowhere until I'd pass him. And then all of a sudden he could gain a couple seconds. So, that got old to me. I didn't appreciate him not being able to get up to speed unless he followed me. But we ended up going in 1987. We went to the match races, and it was the U.S. against the Brits. And Kevin and I, our bikes we had the best bikes on the grid. But the first 3 races were at Brands Hatch, and it was a 9-race series, 3 there, and then there was another 6 races at Donington Park the next couple days. But if you could win all 9 races, you would win 100,000 pounds sterling gold. But Kevin and I, but nobody on the team, and there was like 9 or 10 of us on the American team, but nobody, I guess they thought they didn't have a chance, or they didn't really think that they needed to speak to us about, what's going to happen if somebody wins the first race. It never occurred to me that I wasn't going to win the first race. And as it turned out, Kevin wanted it as bad as I did. And we ended up having a big battle and banged into each other that first race. He got the better of me, but that just pissed me off for the second race. And I put a couple moves on him, and I made sure he didn't walk away with that all them wins. So at the end of that series, I think I won 5 races and he won 4. I believe that's what it was, but I think he ended up with more points than me. I had a helmet malfunction in one race, but yeah, that pretty much kind of, the gloves were put on at that event, and we were not very friendly to each other off the track. Didn't like each other, and it was all about beating each other on the track. Yeah. So, yeah, great rival. It's a little bit better now, though.
Yeah, it's funny that because there's been a lot that's been said about your rivalry between yourself and Kevin, and how Kevin's motivation for racing really dropped off after your accident. And so it was a real heated rivalry, wasn't it? It wasn't just the press beating it up. You guys genuinely didn't like each other.
No, it's pretty real. Yeah. No, I don't think you can't fake that. I remember when we both went to Europe, and the first race was at Suzuka, and I didn't know how I was going to do, and I'm sure he was thinking the same. But Kevin ended up winning the first race, and I think I ended up sixth place. And for me, I was thinking, sixth place it's not so bad. I beat my teammate, which was always the most important thing to me, just about. But
Yeah.
Kevin won the race, and I just thought, and being in GPs and in the World Championship and seeing the attention that he got, man, I was just like, wow, I've got some work to do. I cannot let this ever happen again. Not like that, I mean, I didn't want Kevin to be the guy that just elevated it, and I was struggling. So, I just worked really hard at what I did. I really thought about my riding. I thought about my bike setup a lot. I worked with my mechanics all the time. I trained really hard. And the second race was at Laguna Seca. I had pole. I ended up fourth, but Kevin was fifth, so that was good for me.
Yeah.
That year, I think I ended up winning a race in Donington Park. It was my only win that year, but I finished on the podium more than half the races. And I finished third in the World Championship, and again beat Kevin. So that was a big success for me.
That's right. Yeah. So you sort of move on to 89, and by 1989 you're looking at the championship at that point, and you very nearly pull it off too. If it hadn't been for slight over the top bar moment I think it was at Sweden, wasn't it?
Yeah, Sweden. I still think about it. It's we were on Dunlops. 88 and 89, we were in 89. We were really the only top team on Dunlops. Eddie had moved from Yamaha to Honda. He was on the Rothmans Honda. They were on Michelin, and Michelin they made really strong tires for the 500 class that year. We had some issues with tires, but that race at Sweden was my mistake. I was leading it. I was actually leading the championship going into that race, I believe, and there was, I think, a couple laps left. Eddie and I were racing it out, and they had this kind of a banked right-hand corner that led on to this long straightaway that was like onto an airport runway. And I just, got on the throttle a little bit early, and the tire was there, and then it stepped out, and I high-sided. And I remember going down. I thought, well, I've lost this now. And then I remember the next lap, Eddie came by, and he had a good long look at me over there in the sand trap, and I thought, you son of a... And I'm not going to forget that. And as it turned out, Eddie ended up being my teammate in 1990, so I was able to pay it back somewhat.
Yeah. That I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, in your years as a factory or as a Yamaha racer, you had 4 different teammates in 6 years, I think it was. So, I mean, I've got a few photos here we'll show. So 88, 89, you've got Kevin McGee here. I think that was at Laguna, actually, that year. And then 1990, you had, as you say, Mr. Lawson. That was, I think, at the preseason or the first race photos that you had. And then 91 and 92, you had John Kaczynski, who was, I guess, the heir apparent at one point or another. I mean, he was one of Kenny's boys coming through. And then the final year, you had Luca Catalora, who really started to hit his stride towards the end of your career. And who do you think out of those guys, because there's some serious names there. I mean, they've all won championships, 250s for, I mean, McGee's a multiple Australian championship winner, and 250 championships, World Superbike championships, 500 championships, but yet you beat them all. Who do you think was the hardest one to sort of get on top of?
It's a good question. when Eddie came to my team, I knew that we were going to have the same equipment, so I could race him head to head. And by then, this was my third year. He was coming on to my team, so I was ready for Eddie Lawson that year. Eddie had I ended up winning the first race pretty easy. I was quicker than Eddie in all the preseason testing. I just put a big emphasis on smoking my teammate. I really had to make them think that they weren't going to be able to challenge me. So I put a lot of effort into that. Unfortunately, though, for Eddie, he had a brake malfunction at Laguna Seca, and he ended up not having his front brakes at the second race, and ended up breaking both his heels, I believe. So he was out of the championship and really wasn't much of a factor that year. But when he did come back, I think he thought I had preferable treatment. And I remember one race at the Czech Republic. It was, I think all I had to do was finish in the top 13 or something to win the championship. And Eddie was upset. He was thinking I had something different. So I said, hey, let's just trade fairings. I'll ride your bike. Well, that didn't go over so well with him. So I ended up winning the race. I won the championship that day, and Eddie didn't show up on the podium. So he wasn't, even though Eddie and I are great friends now, we don't really talk about those times. But yeah, but as far as the question that you asked, I'd have to say it was John Kaczynski.
Right.
Because John was, he was real cocky, and he was hanging out with Kenny's, and so I could see him ride. He had unbelievable talent, and he was very, very sure of himself. And, in that 250 World Championship, he won the championship that year. I think it was 1990. When he came to my team, I remember our first press conference, they asked him, how do you think you're going to do, learning how to ride these 500s? And he had no problem saying, well, I think I'll be learning while I'm winning. And so I took the long look at him at that stage. And so I just made sure he never did that. And so that was, I'm not trying to be cocky or anything. That's just the way I did it back then. Yeah.
That's, there are so many stories of Kaczynski's, I guess, cockiness, or there's also a lot of stories which probably won't repeat about people trying to offset Kaczynski somewhat. They'll be, putting grease on his boots or, whatever it was that I've heard a couple of good ones from World Superbike, which I won't repeat here. But so 1990.
John was okay. John was always very respectful towards me, only because I got the best of him most of the time. But I guarantee you, if he would have been racing me or ahead of me, he would have had no problem being much different towards me. But I remember the race at Laguna Seca. I think it was the second or third race in 1991, and we were racing, and it was for qualifying, and I out-qualified him by just like a thousandth or two for pole position. And he told the press, he goes, I guess we're going to see who the king of Laguna Seca is tomorrow. And so he didn't get too good of a start. I got a really good start, and I kept thinking about what he said every lap. And so when I stretched it out to about 7 seconds, by the time he got second place, I had a pretty good lead by then. And, he'd pick up a 10th here, I'd get it back there. And finally, he chucked it away, trying to chase me down. So he ended up in a police car that day, leaving the racetrack. He was pretty upset, I guess, and ended up in the pokey. So Laguna.
It must have felt good for you being the world champion. Prove your point on that one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. What was it about Laguna Seca that suited you so well? Like, you won there in '89, in 1990, again in 1991. What was it about that place? Because it's Laguna Seca is such a different circuit to anywhere else in the world. I've been lucky enough to do a lot of riding there, and it's hands down one of my favorite US racetrack. What was it that made you gel with it so well?
I think Laguna Seca is a very technical racetrack. I think the way that I rode the bike gelled very well there because you have to be very precise on your lines when you turn into the corners there. Laguna Seca is a circuit that if you turn in too soon, you hit the apex run early and you run wide. But if you turn in too late, then you miss the whole apex altogether. And so that type of racetrack was just easy for me. And I had a lot of fun riding there. The Laguna Seca, I always thought, if you could get a bike to work good there, it's going to work good everywhere because there was flat corners, bank corners, and there was off camber turns, downhill corners. Probably my favorite corner out there is certainly turn one. I remember in practice there, you would be peaked out in 6th gear on the 500. And then I would gear my bike to be peaked out right as you kind of bend it over as it went over the rise in turn one. But on those 500s back then with those tires, you could get it to break loose easy. But the way I had it geared is that when it would spin up as I'd lean it, it would just go into over rev. It wouldn't keep accelerating over the hill. But most of the guys I figured out they were gearing their bike to keep accelerating over the hill. So I was able to go over that hill so much more confident than most other riders because I always knew where the bike was going to be. And but I just loved Laguna Seca. It was the only place that we had raced in front of our home fans, in front of my family, and I really wanted to win there. And it was that way when I went and raced my first time in 1982 and 83. I just loved the place. It was the best road course in America. And so when we brought it back for the Grand Prix, I was probably the happiest guy in the paddock.
Yeah. So the one year that we didn't have an American race during your reign as world champion was 1992. That was a difficult year for you, even though you did win the championship. But there were a lot of things that happened that year. I mean, Mick had his accident. Mick Doohan had his accident. For guys, I'm sure everybody knows, but Mick Doohan had a serious accident where he nearly lost his leg at the Dutch TT. You actually didn't race that event, did you? You had crashed the previous race in Germany, I think, from memory.
92 was a strange year because we had won the championship the previous 2 years, but at the end of 91, racing in Malaysia, I had an accident and I'd broken my femur underneath the kneecap. So I was really, I did that. I think it was in October. We started testing in November around Thanksgiving time. I missed that test. I was really struggling trying to get range of motion out of my knee and the kneecap. So I had a couple manipulations where I'd get knocked out in the hospital. Our team would just take my knee and just bust through all that scar tissue. And then we were putting epidurals in my back so I could try to start riding a motorcycle again. But at night, though, with the epidural, we would numb up my body. Basically, I couldn't feel my legs at all, just so we could just try to bust through that range of motion. Bit of science, a bit of wackiness back then when I think about it. But sure. It's that year, Kaczynski, that was the second year. He had started the development. He liked the bike a certain way. So when I came back for my first test on the bike was in Barcelona, I didn't like the way the bike felt at all. We had a real stiff chassis that year. Öhlins had built real strong, big forks. We had big axles in both wheels. So the bike was just real stiff. And back then, the motorcycle manufacturers didn't realize that you needed a little flexi of a chassis when you had the bike bent over in the corners so it could absorb some of the bumps and you carry speed through the corner. But that bike that year, it was just impossible to do. And we had a lot of stiction with the new big forks that Öhlins made. As an example, I remember getting on the brakes and the front forks wouldn't go down. They would just lock. And the only way I could get the forks to move was I'd have to get off the brake. And so you could imagine 180 mile an hour going into a corner and you have to slow down. But to get the bike to turn the way you wanted it to, you have to get off the brakes. So it was a real challenge there for most of that year. And Honda that year had built that big bang motor. They designed this their whole engine and chassis around that bike. And Mick by then had, I think he was on his third or fourth season riding those bikes, and he was ready. He came out. That bike worked good for him, and he was kicking our ass pretty easy. He won the first race. I think he won the first 4 or 5 races. I don't recall. I got on the podium, I believe, like the next 3 times, but I was, trying to sort the bike, and I was, back then, them tires, we were back on Michelin now, and trying to adjust the bike to these from Dunlop one year to Michelin the next. We had our hands full, and our development, the Honda bike was good, especially with Mick on it, but now it was good with all the other riders like Crivier and Wayne Gardner.
Yeah.
So, and the way I was looking at it is I wasn't really thinking about trying to beat my teammate as much as I was thinking about not wanting to lose the world championship. And I had made a few mistakes that I had not done previously, trying to lug this bike around the track. And then, I'd broken my hand a couple times and did some damage to my back. And I just went, wow, this is not looking good. So I decided to go home and heal one race.
Right.
And it wasn't that I gave up or anything. It was just that I was tired of throwing myself down the road.
Sure.
And when I came home, I saw that Mick had an accident. He got thrown off the bike, but his was it was quite a bit worse than we had previously knew at the time. So he about lost his leg, and so I'm not sure how many races he was out, but I came back, and the next race we came back, and I think we raced 4 or 5 races without Mick. And I think I won a couple, 2 or 3 of the races, but I was on the podium. And when Mick came back for Brazil, that was the first time I had seen Mick since Aston. And when I saw Mick, I was just really surprised about how bad he looked. And if Mick is here wanting to ride that bike, he's still hungry for this championship. So I just thought, I've got to give it the best shot for myself too, because I have a chance now. And in Brazil, I ended up winning the race, and I think Mick, I don't know, I think he got 12th or something. And so so there was only 1 race left, and he had a couple points on me, and so I had to beat him in the last race, and I was able to pull off a 3rd place, and I think Mick got 6th. So I ended up world champion. So I'm really proud of that championship, even though it was a bit messy for me to pull it off. Obviously, Mick had his issues that certainly helped my chances. But as they say, that's all racing.
Yeah, that's right. I want to show you this photo here because this should be a fairly happy memory for you. That was Catalunya 1992. I think that was your first win of the year, if I'm not mistaken. And for those of you who have a MotoGP.com login, go and watch that race. One race of the 2 I'm going to talk to Wayne about here, but that was a hell of a race, and you managed to get him. So tell us a little bit about that, because that would have been when you were still fighting with the bike as well.
Oh yeah, big time. We were not in the hunt at that race until race day. We were able to lower my right foot peg, which actually relieved the range of motion problem I was having. But the biggest thing was the wind direction changed on race day. I mean, the wind was blowing so hard the opposite direction, it blew down most of the signage around the track. Little did we know that was going to help me with some of the problems we were having with the way the bike was feeling going into the corners because of the stiff chassis. So with the wind direction change, we actually had a lot of extra push being pushed down onto the front of the bike, which gave me a so much more better feel. And by then, we had done some work with a suspension that helped out the stiction problem. And I was able to start racing Mick, was like the first time all year, I believe. And we ended up winning the race. And he led most of the race, I believe. But it was just great winning again. I was really, really excited and pumped that we could do that at that point.
Yeah, I remember when I went back and watched that race and saw your reaction as you went over the line. Like that was a big time race with both arms in the air, and you could tell that meant a lot.
Oh yeah, still does.
Yeah. So you win the championship again for a third time in 1992, and now we move on to the last year, 1993, and that was the year really that it was the Wayne and Kevin show, wasn't it? Like previously, Mick had been there, Gardner had been there occasionally in the previous years, although probably he was a bit more in line with Eddie Lawson's time. But '93 was the Wayne and Kevin show, and that leads us into. I mean, we've spoken about this in the past, but Suzuka 1993. That's a sort of a famous one for you. I mean. Good for the people at home that don't know the meaning of this race for you. Talk us through that race, because that was one of the all-time classic Grand Prix.
Yeah, for sure, Rainey. That was it's probably my favorite race. It was a big battle. I think it was Kevin, myself, Daryl Beatty, and Shinito Ito on the Honda, and we all raced together. I was the only guy on Dunlops in that pack, and I was able to race with those guys, and I had actually caught them. I think I was running 5th or 6th or further back at the start of the race. I didn't get a good start, but I was able to chase them down, and I caught them and passed them, and then I could tell my tires went off, so I slowed down and let those guys back by. If you can think about letting guys by, I even dropped back to 4th place and cooled the tires down and had another go at it, and was able to go back through them again. And then I had actually pulled a little bit on the pack in the lap. The problem I was having at that race that I remember was we had straightaway speed problem. So I was getting, if I couldn't get into first, I needed to lead into first place at the end of the front straight. And every time that I came through, those guys were always drafting me. And then as we would go through the S's, they were holding me up. So I knew I needed to try to figure out a way to lead it into turn 1. If I could lead it into turn 1, I thought I could pull out enough in the S's that they wouldn't be able to draft me back. And so I tried it a couple times, wasn't able to do it. And then finally I was able to get a double bike draft and was able to lead it into the chicane. And then coming out of the chicane, I got a really good drive. And then I went way far to the inside down the main straight. So if they had to pass me, it was going to have to be around the outside. And they weren't able to pass me into turn 1. So, man, I went for it. And I was able to pull out a little bit of gap. I didn't turn around at all to see where they were. But I remember going through one of the corners. It was right before the hairpin. As I was going into the fast right, it was really strange. I had this kind of an out of body experience where I was actually looking down at myself and I was laughing. And and anyhow, I'll tell you the rest of that after the race. But so as we went through the hairpin and I accelerated out, then there's this, I don't know what they call that part of the track, but it's a long downhill right-hander. And I was in 5th gear. And on the last lap, I'd had a pretty good lead because when I watch it on a replay, but in 5th gear though, it actually stepped out on me there, and I almost high-sided in 5th gear. I think it was on the last lap, and I'd lost everything that I had gained in Beatty and Kevin, and they had all actually caught back up to me going into the last chicane. But when I went into the chicane and nobody passed me, I knew I had that thing won, and that was great. But I remember on the cool down lap, I was thinking about, I could never tell anybody what I just told you guys about the body experience. It'll take my license away. So I sat on that for a long, long time. It's a little bit easier to say it now, but I still got the trophy.
So as we then sort of go through the season, you and Kevin are trading punches, basically. It's and then as it gets to Donington, Kevin has his big accident, which I think he was taken out by Mick and Barros, I think, and all three of them went down. And this sort of leads into one of the more controversial moments, I guess, of that season, because Luca Catalura was starting to hit his stride at that point. Like, he was starting to figure the 500 out. And I guess, I don't know, maybe Mr. Roberts, Kenny thought it was team orders or how it was, but he ended up passing you, which, I don't know, like, was that in the game plan, or was he supposed to be riding shotgun that time?
No, there was no game plan. And really, I don't know if Luca would pull in sometimes because he didn't like the way the bike felt. So but he did go very well there at Donington Park that day. But the real story is, in qualifying the day before, we were struggling a little bit, and then so I had this bright idea that if I ran wide into the last turn, I could get a better run to start my lap, and I promptly high-sided out of that left hairpin coming onto the main straight. But when I high-sided, I banged my head and I had a concussion, but I had really done some real damage to my body. So I remember when I went back into the paddock, everything was kind of a blur and a buzz. I didn't say anything to anybody, and I woke up the next day and I was still fuzzy. So I thought, well, I'll go out and ride the morning warm up and see how it feels. So I went out there and rode that, and I was like 2 seconds off the pace. And when I came in, Mike Sinclair, my crew chief, goes, is it your back? And I said, no, it's my depth perception. I can't pass anybody. I don't have confidence. It just does. I don't feel good. And he goes, you're not going to ride, are you? And I said, I have no idea what I'm going to do. So I went back to my motorhome, and I had this idea that everybody that I raced against all these years, they knew on cold tires that I'm pretty comfortable. I could go really good on cold tires. So at Donington Park, the first turn is not so far away from the starting line. So I had qualified 8th on the second row. So I went in and told Sinclair to put in a real low second gear, because in my mind, I thought if I could try to lead the race out of the first turn, then maybe something will happen. I had no idea, but I knew they would not try to pass me on the first lap. So I started off in second gear, and I went into the first turn in second. And then Alex Barros on the Suzuki ran wide, and now I'm in first. And I thought, perfect. That's exactly what I was hoping. And so I cruised around because I didn't have to judge off anybody because nobody's in front of me. And so as I come around the first lap leading, I saw my lap board going over the pit wall late. And so I thought, So I went around the next lap, and as I was going around the lap, I was looking to see, if I could see somebody down. And at this stage, what I did leave out was, I think Kevin was leading the world championship, and he had a bit of a lead on me in the points. I think it was a 11 or 12 point lead, something like that. But anyhow, as it turned out, at the end of that first lap, as I came around the second lap, my lap board said, Kevin, out. And I just went, wow, this is great. That's exactly what I was hoping. I didn't know what had happened, but so I just put it on cruise control. I just went, well, okay, Kevin's out. I'm not feeling good. I'm going to just all this end up wherever I do. So as it turned out, Luca was right on my butt, and he was like right there. And I was thinking, just pass me. I'm okay with it. Kevin's out. I'm okay with you going by me. But he wouldn't pass me. And I guess there was some controversy with the team trying to figure out if they should tell Luca to stay. And I heard they told him, P2. But if everybody knew the story, I was just glad to be racing that day. So I was okay with Luca passing me. It was no biggie.
All right. Yeah, so you go off, then win the next round at Brno, which it turns out was your final Grand Prix win. We move on to Misano, and it's obviously a not just turning point just for your racing career, it's a turning point for your life. What was the pressure like leading into that race? Because you had just retaken the lead in the championship. I think you were leading at the time of your accident. Like, it was a bit of a pressure cooker situation at that point.
Yeah, it certainly was, because I was racing Kevin Schwantz, my great rival, and we had both matured and had grown up a bit since the early days, but it was pretty serious business trying to be the world champion. He was going for his first, and he was riding that year like he had never ridden before. I think, like I said before, Kevin was always inspired when he saw me. And no matter how bad his bike was, he could muscle that thing around there. And he would ride by the seat of his pants to stay with me. So that's why I always tried to get a good gap on him in 5 laps at the start of most races. But anyhow, that particular race going into Misano, so we had Misano, and then we had Laguna Seca, and then it was the last race in Madrid, Spain. All those tracks favored me, at least it favored my record. So I thought to myself, if I could beat Kevin at Misano, I thought I could pressure him to like, hey, I'm not going to be able to beat him. Uh-huh. So, but it all started in the morning warm up at Misano, because the track was kind of damp, and I was on one end of the track, Kevin was on the other going around, and when I'd passed my lap board, I'd see that Kevin was fastest lap, and then my timer would say I was quickest, and then the next lap I'd come around, I'd see Kevin was the fastest guy, and then I'd see my timer and I'd be the quickest. So we went back and forth like that, and it started in the morning warm up, and I forget now who was quickest after the warm up, but in the race, Luca had actually out-qualified me. But Misano was a very special racetrack for me. In '84 is where I got my first podium. But what was really special about Misano, they run it in the opposite direction that they do now. They actually ruined the track running it in the direction that they do now. But it was counterclockwise back then. So there was 5 left-hand turns that you'd go second, third, fourth, fifth. And when your tire was really good, which was normally only for 1 lap, you could do 6th onto the back straight. But most of the time it was 5th gear. I look forward to those that set of 5 corners every single lap. But in the race, it was a 30-lap race, and the effort that I was putting on myself to try to get away from Kevin, I was only doing it like a couple of thousandths a lap. So after the first 10 laps of a 30-lap race, I think I'd built up less than a 2-second lead on him. And it was just coming much, much harder than I thought it should. I mean, I was really fit. 10 laps is nothing, but I was exhausted after 10 laps, and mentally and physically. And going into the first turn, I just missed my breaker point just by a little bit. At those speeds, an inch or 2 is a mile. Yeah. And so when I flicked it into the first turn, I was offline, so I was off throttle a long time. So I had a lot of load on the tires. I was really bent over trying to get it back online, and got it back online. And I tried to accelerate, and it immediately stepped out. And before I knew it, I was on the ground before I knew anything. And then I thought, damn, I've lost the world championship. And I was sliding across the ground, and I slid into the gravel trap, and then I just felt like I was still going really fast, and I was still just flipping really a lot, because the gravel traps back then had speed bumps in them. And I just thought, wow, I just hope there's not a crash wall out here to stop me, because I was going way too fast. And just about the time I was about to stop, it felt like I felt something. I felt a huge pop in my back, and I laid there on the track, and in my whole 25 years, I think it was 25 years of racing, I had always, almost every time, I'd been able to get up, no matter how bad I'd hurt myself. But as I was laying there on that track, I was trying to get up, but I could only move my arms, and I couldn't. I was confused, and I could hear the bikes going by, and I was thinking, how could something I love, hurt me like this? And then I felt my legs, and I realized that my hands felt my legs, but my legs didn't feel my hands. So the battle started.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's chilling, to hear. Goosebumps when you talk about that. I mean, how you then transitioned immediately into a new phase of life. How did you cope with that mentally? Because you've gone from being, there's very few people in the world who can genuinely say they're the very best in the world at something, and then to have it ripped away and not just affect their career, but completely affect their entire life. Like, that must have been a really tough mental time for you.
Yeah, certainly was. It was, my life, the next couple days, I don't remember a whole lot, but, I just remember, getting back home and, I was on so many drugs there at the beginning, because I'd broken my spine and it severed my spinal cord. I was in a tremendous amount of pain. So I don't remember a lot, but I was in a body cast for 6 weeks. And then I went into rehab at Long Beach after I finally got home, and they took that cast off and I had my first shower. But just setting up and trying to, get out of bed and, being, I remember I think they call them sliding boards, where they'd stick this piece of plywood underneath your bum and they'd slide you over into your chair. And, when you first experience that and you're in this wheelchair, it's just like a bad dream. You just think, wow,
yeah.
what, there is nothing the same, not nothing. So it was a real battle. I mean, I'm not going to kid you. There's, I still have tough days, but if there's one thing that racing has taught me is that, you can't give up. You have to keep going. And, I have my wonderful wife, Shay, that's she's always supported me, always been there for me, and never loved me any less. So I guess I'm pretty fortunate in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of wanted to ask you then, was it an initial theory like you had to get back to the track? Is that what brought on the idea of becoming a team owner or team manager at that stage? Because you were, at that point, you had, I think it was about 7 months or 6 or 8 months, and then you're running Kenny Roberts Jr. in the 250 thing. Like, what spurred on that? Did you want to become a team manager?
It was all happening really fast, Rainey. It's, when I think back of that time, there was no playbook on what is the correct way to go about getting back, going forward in your life. But one thing I do remember, though, is I had a lot of opportunities. Kenny Roberts, I mean, I love the guy like a brother. He, racing for him was a thrill. I learned so much from him. He gave me so many opportunities, and I wanted to win for him as bad as I wanted to win for me. And I think I'm probably his most successful rider that he's ever had. And there was here I am in this chair, and I was only in rehab for 5 weeks, and I said, enough of this. I got to go back home and live. And just, as it turned out, I made a lot of mistakes, but I had opportunities with Marlboro and with Yamaha, and I had sponsorship, and I had motorcycles, and Kenny's going, hey, let's go do this. So that's what we did, and I did that, and so that kind of helped take off that kind of the emotional side of the struggles that I was having on a daily basis, because I had something else to focus on. And I always thought that maybe when I was done racing, that maybe I could run a team. I never thought that I would be forced into it like like what happened there in 93, 94. But it was a new challenge working with riders, and that first couple years really was an adjustment. Yeah, it was a long time ago.
Yeah. I wanted to just backtrack quickly. There's you say like racing tells you never to give up, and you always have to keep pushing. There's a photo I want to show you, which is my all-time favorite photo of you, which kind of I think encapsulates you as this shot. it's such a powerful image. I think it was from, I'm going to say it's 92, but it might be 91. I'm not sure. I mean, you had the showy helmet on, so it was prior to 93. What sort of, like, that is game face, that image to me. Like, how did you get into the mindset of like, all right, cool, it's go time? Like, did you have a pre-race ritual, or did you have to sort of transport yourself to a different mind state to get ready to battle the best?
Yeah, I mean, it was all that. I had a routine that I had developed throughout my Grand Prix career. You know, when I was able to finally get the confidence to know that I could run with these guys, and then to battle Eddie there in 89, and then to win it in 90. And then I didn't want to lose it. And so, but I knew that I had to get better every year. So the way I trained, I had Dean Miller that was monitoring my training regime. So everything that I did was focused on being the best I could be on the track. And, you know, back in those days, 91, 92, 93, you know, I had a routine that, you know, I could get into the motorhome by myself before the race. And if I could put a lap together in my head with absolutely no distractions, just put a whole lap, shifting points, where I wanted to be on the track. And every time I had a distraction, whether it was like, I'd think about a gearbox ratio or something with a suspension setting, I'd always reset and do it again. And so I could put a whole lap in my head. And I thought subconsciously, it doesn't matter what happens when I leave this motorhome, I am ready to go. And I remember, you know, going into the garage is mostly my favorite time, was walking into the garage on race day and seeing my team, and, you know, seeing the bikes and seeing that brand new rubber on the bikes, and knowing that this is what I prepared for. I am ready for this. And real thrill. Yeah, I can even get real emotional about it now.
Yeah, it's a special feeling that I suppose there's very few people in the world will ever experience. I mean, we all get it. I mean, so many of us have ridden and raced motorcycles, but very few have ever got to do it at MotoGP level. So, I mean, I get the goosebumps just by walking into the things and just seeing the bikes, and they're not even mine. So I can't imagine what they must be like to ride.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, you know, thinking about it, and you know, you'd get on your bike, and then you'd go out and do your sighting lap, and then you'd stop, and then you'd be on your starting position. You know, back in those days, the riders kept their helmets on; they didn't take them off. And then back in '93, I had actually pushed for, you know, maybe we should start taking our helmets off so we can show, you know, the fans what we look like without our helmets on the track. But you know what? My ritual was, even though I was pushing for that, that day I did not take my helmet off in '93 on the track at Misano that day. But I remember lining up, and I'd see Mick or Kevin, and, you know, you'd give each other a nod or a thumbs up, and, you know, but I could tell by the look in their eyes that they had their race face on. And so, you know, I had to be ready. And, you know, as you sit there and you wait for that green light to go, and when it actually goes, then everything's automatic.
Yeah, it's I've often said that racing bikes is the only time I've ever experienced that where you're completely free of any other thoughts. You can have everything going bad around you, but as soon as that green light goes, it's a pretty zen-like feeling.
That's exactly right. It's the same today. You know, I think riding a motorcycle on a canyon road is so much more enjoyable than being in a car, because you can just get lost in your own thoughts and enjoy the independence that motorcycles give you. But, you know, racing them at the highest level back in those days on those great machines that 500 two-strokes with no electronics and not much room for error was a real thrill. So I was pretty lucky.
You raced in some amazing circuits as well. Like when we see the circuits that they race at now, and there's not many of them that are left from the days when you were racing. I mean, like, you raced at Spa, like the old Hockenheim, the Salzburg Ring. You know, these were men's circuits, and I can't imagine. Like, I mean, Spa and a 500 must have been something else altogether.
Oh, yeah, I love Spa. I won the last race there in 1990, I think was the last year they had a Grand Prix. And it was in the rain. Yeah. Loved it. Loved everything about it. I remember going on to the back section of Spa where you'd actually come out of the actual proper racing circuit. Then you actually go on to the public road part of it. And back then, the big heavy trucks, or lorries, they would call them, they had like worn tire tracks into the road. So, and it rains all the time in Belgium. And I remember coming onto that back part of that circuit and going over those puddles where those tire tracks were, and the bike just going wah 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 across it. Fifth gear. It was great. Loved it.
Yeah, I would spend hours. I mean, my mum's actually watching this in Australia. Hi, Mum. I just used to play videos, especially of Hockenheim. I always thought Hockenheim was such an amazing track, but I suppose we're getting a little bit off topic here. But so we go. Okay, you're done with the team manager thing. You come back to the US, I think, at the end of '98. I think it was your last year. You got into go-kart racing. You got into a bit of four-wheel stuff. Tell us a bit about that, because your late father was involved in that as well.
Yeah. So Eddie was back in my life at that point. We had a lot of time to heal and repair our friendship. And basically, he built me a go-kart, with hand controls, and Yamaha had helped us out with parts. And I didn't know what this was all about, but I thought it could have been a cool way to kind of challenge me. I thought, going around Laguna Seca again at the speeds that were similar to what I used to race at would have been pretty cool. So the go-kart was a lot of fun. It really was. I had some complications that kept me from going as good as I wanted, but I just kept telling myself, hey, let's just have fun doing this. So we did that for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. I spent a shitload of money doing it. I tell you that.
Yeah, if you want to, what is the thing? If you want to make a small fortune in racing, start with a big fortune.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I've got you. I've been neglecting a few of these. We've been getting tons of comments here. Mike Rinn says thank you. David Albin, Mr. Rainey, you are a legend. Again, pleasure to see you race at Laguna Seca. The champ, great listening. That was actually from my mum. Great listening about team rivalry. And here's a question from Nigel Crowley. He's actually a journalist in Australia. He wants to know if you're going to be doing any more riding now that you got back in the saddle last year.
Well, I have a plan. I ran it by my wife. She wasn't excited about it at all. She wasn't too excited about when I decided to go ride this last November, but there could be one more ride in there, Rennie. We'll see. There's a few things that need to happen for my idea to work, but we'll see. I really enjoyed that one opportunity. I had no desire to ever ride a motorcycle again after my racing accident. I just did a thing with Kevin Schwantz yesterday and with Lee Diffie, and Kevin said, "What took you so long?" But I just never had no desire. I had zero desire to ride. But one day I just woke up like 1 month before that event in Japan, and I just said, why not? And so, Keith McCarty there at Yamaha put the bike together for me, and I was able to go out to Button Willow, and my wife was there, and my brother Rodney, and Paul Carruthers. And so I went out and rode, and I remember when I was done riding, Josh Hayes was following me, and he was in like gardening gloves. It was, because I was not going fast. And I said, hey, how fast did we go out there, man? It felt like 150. And he goes, you're almost doing 90. Yeah, it was really strange. Speed has changed a lot over the years.
Yeah, your depth perception certainly changes a little bit when you've been away from it from a while.
Yeah, it sure did.
Yeah. How one thing this is a little bit off topic, but one thing I wanted to ask you is how has the business of MotoGP racing, do you think, changed in the time that you were there? I mean, it's always been the biggest sport, biggest level of the sport, but how have you seen it change, especially now with Dorna having full control over the series, going into new countries? How is it different to your time?
I think popularity for sure. There's a lot more interest in the sport due to social media and television. Heck, when I was racing, there wasn't even cell phones then, wasn't an internet. So, the way people get their information now is immediate. So people can watch these guys go test, and so there's more money in the sport. One thing that hasn't changed is that there's still just a couple guys that are a step above everybody else, and those are the guys, like in every era, are going to be the ones that are going to be racing for the championship, and everybody else there is just fill the show.
Just a bit player. How's your opinion of? Marc Marquez is a incredible talent. I suppose the two guys has always been Marquez and Valentino. I mean, Valentino, he's not that much younger than you, is he?
Wow! What a career that guy's had. Valentino's done an incredible job. His timing with the way the sport has grown it's been equal with him. He's had, being an Italian and the popularity of the sport in Italy, the guy's just a lot of charisma. He loves riding the bikes. He loves everything about, the challenges that face Grand Prix racing. I think he's been pretty, injury free. I think the four strokes helped that. The electronics certainly helped generate less high sides, which was a big problem back in my day. But, a lot of I think the bikes are really cool now. They look cool. They're fast. The way the electronics work, a guy that doesn't have as much talent as Marquez can still get within a second. But it's a little bit different getting within a second and trying to beat him, though, that's for sure. He's an amazing talent. Marquez, I love watching him ride. I'm amazed that he just gets up as much as he does after picking himself up off the ground. But most of it's, he'll go in too hot on the front brake and push the front. And that's where I rarely see him high side. But I have seen him high side, and it reminds me of the old days. Looks just like what we used to do.
Yeah, well, he's had a couple he had that one last year, the
cold
where he won the champ. Yeah, but high side on the way into the corner. Yeah. Well, look, Wayne, I won't keep you any longer, but look, huge thank you so much for coming on the show. It's a true honor to have you on here, and I can tell from all the comments that we've been getting that everyone out here has been really pumped on this as well. And I'll be looking forward to catching up with you when we go to Moto America this year when it starts all again.
Hey, thanks. Good job, and appreciate all the support for our championship. We're really excited this year. I can't wait for the season to start. Like I said, we'll have a big announcement here in a day or two. So thank you, and thanks to everyone watching, and stay safe.
All right. Thanks a lot, Wayne. Cheers. Thanks, mate. Right. So there you go, guys. I've still got goosebumps off that one. What an incredible guy. I first met Wayne Rainey when I was a 6-year-old, and I chased him down at the 1989 Australian Grand Prix, first Australian 500cc Grand Prix, and I demanded an autograph. I've still got that at home. The guy is an absolute living legend and an incredible inspiration. I don't think I've ever heard him talk in depth about the accident like that. And you can imagine what they would have done for his mindset, being the very, very best in the world, and then just having it yanked away from you like that. And then not just your career being taken away, but your entire life tipped upside down. He was a young father at the time as well, but it shows the mental fortitude of somebody that gets the top of their chosen profession like that and just keeps coming back. As he says, racing teaches you to never give up, and that's he's a living example of that. So yeah, so that's the end of our telecast, guys. Please give this a thumbs up, give it a share, give us a subscribe as well if you're watching on YouTube. We're going to be doing more of these. We're really enjoying doing these things and longer form interviews. So it looks like you guys are enjoying it as well. So thanks again, guys, and we'll be seeing you guys soon for another episode of Cycle News Live. Stay safe out there. We'll be riding soon. Thanks, guys. Cheers.